show has been warning all of you now for months how the number of COVID deaths could be inflated. So why are we still seeing it happen? In Colorado, the Grand County coroner says that 2 deaths recently counted as COVID were actually due to something quite different.
These 2 people had tested positive for COVID, but that's not what killed them. The gunshot wound is what killed them. I had not even finished my investigation, and these people did not die of COVID.
And in Washington, new analysis from the Freedom Foundation reveals that state may be drastically overcounting COVID deaths. Some of them included a 99-year-old who died after losing her balance and falling, a 71-year-old who died from blunt force injury of the head and neck, and a 64-year-old who died after overdosing on heroin and fentanyl. Joining me now is the man who uncovered this, Max Nelsen, Labor Policy Director for the Freedom Foundation. Max, you say that they've taken steps to amend the numbers, but these are just the cases that have been discovered. From what I'm hearing, this is just a tiny slice of how incorrectly these deaths are being tallied, or attributed, I should say.
Correct. And there's a lot of issues with the data out here in Washington State. And unfortunately, our State Department of Health has not been very transparent when it comes to releasing the data and allowing for third-party review. We've worked for the last 6 months after we first discovered that Washington State was counting any person who died after testing positive as a COVID death, even if there was nothing, even if COVID didn't play a role in their death. And we knew that method was going to result in overcounting the deaths. And it's taken us 6 months now, but we've finally got actual death certificate data from the Department of Health for these claimed COVID deaths. And that's where we started discovering that, in 170 cases, there was no reference to COVID at all on the death certificate. And in dozens of others, some of the cases you cited, it's very clear that something other than COVID was responsible for these people's deaths.
So in other words, as we've been talking about since I think April, we started talking about this, or May, people are dying with COVID, but not the primary cause not being COVID, correct? In many cases.
And I'd go even further than that, Laura, and some of the cases that we've come across just recently with this latest report, some of the death certificates had a reference to COVID, but it was to clarify that the people had recovered from it, or they'd repeatedly tested negative before they died. So these are people that aren't even dying with COVID from some other cause. These are, also people who died after recovering from COVID. It gets even worse.
All right, here's what Washington Department of Health said about the revised numbers. 214 previously reported deaths will be removed from the dashboard. We expect approximately 152 of those reported deaths will be added back once the cause of death is investigated. So they're saying that maybe, I guess in the end, 50 or so were incorrectly attributed to COVID. Is that, in your estimation, correct?
Pinning down the exact number is exceedingly difficult, and even the analysis that we were able to do this week is only current as of the reported COVID deaths of September 4th, because it takes so long to get responsive data from the Department of Health. So I don't know that I can sit here and give you a precise number for what the actual amount is, but I can say that the review that we conducted suggests that there's a lot more than just the 50 or so that the state is saying recently
I know
they're going to take out.
Sorry, Max. Everyone across the country is asking a basic question as they're watching this interview. I believe they're thinking to themselves, well, what's the objective standard? We're talking about medicine, so there can be contributing causes, but what's the determination here? If you're a COVID death, what has to have happened to you?
Right.
How do you attribute it? A primary cause of death, a contributing cause, just having it and falling off a ladder? I mean, to me, this is just the fact that there's not an objective way of determining this. To me, it seems like the problem.
It's very concerning. And after our first research back in April and May, as you mentioned, uncovered some of the systematic problems, the state at the time said, well, okay, that's great. We'll remove the gunshot victims. And they promised us that they were going to start reporting these deaths into different categories. So confirmed cases, where COVID was listed as part of the direct chain of events that led to death, and probable and suspected, but they've never done it. They've never gotten around to giving us that added information.
Well, and everyone knows, because we've said this from the very beginning, every death due to COVID is horrific. It's tragic to every family, every lost loved one. We don't wish it on anyone, and this should never have happened in this country. But our policy has to be dictated on actual, reliable statistics. So we believe in science. That means the data has to follow the science, and Americans need to know the actual count.